Hello, welcome back. We're going to continue with rhythm lessons here. And previously we were talking about cross rhythms or hemiolas, and we were looking at 3s against 4s and 4s against 3s, or 2s against 3s and 3s against 2s. Now we're going to start looking at odd time. So we're going to focus on 5s to begin with. And first of all, discussing the difference between linear and polyrhythmic, because the ones that we were looking at previously, they were polyrhythms, but when you use odd time, you've got an extra. It's not an even number basically. So how do you make this even? First of all, when it's not even, it can sound cool anyway. So you've got maybe a riff like this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use, this is a riff it's from a song from a band called Millionaire. So it's not mine, giving a bit of credit. And Ricky's just going to, what we've got is, it's like a 4/4 beat, but we're just going to add a little nugget on the end. So it's an extra kick drum just to make it resolve. And that's a completely legitimate way of playing odd times. So, let's do it. So that was a 5, which is basically a 4 with that extra kick drum added on at the end and an extra note to fill out the difference. And it sounds great as it is. I mean, that's why I've chosen to use someone else's riff in this lesson. But what we tend to do as a band is explore much smaller versions of 5s, 7s, 9s and so on, and run a quarter note pulse, so a bigger pulse, over the top of it, and it creates all sorts of unusual syncopations. The simplest way to get into that is if you think about 5s being in 16ths, and you've got, let's say, a rhythm going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you're just constantly revolving, counting around 1 to 5, and that is in the same framework as your 16ths that are split up into groups of 4. So you could see it as we need 5 quarter notes here for this to go along with this system. So we're thinking along the lines of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And you hear that there's a bunch of different syncopations going on there, because of the way that the thumb moves against the fingers, and that's kind of what's satisfying about it. So, you know, speeded up, that sounds like. And this is it mapped out, basically. These are 16ths, these are 16ths. So we've got the 5s in red here. That's the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And you can see that it's kind of falling on different E's and ands and as every time it repeats, because you've got one moving in 4, one moving in 5. And you could use a mechanism like this. You could map it out, you could notate it. I find just little diagrams like this a lot easier to visualize. Or what I tend to do is program it in Cubase or Pro Tools or whatever software is available, because it gives you a chance to actually hear if the polyrhythm's any good. You could spend ages learning this, counting 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and then realize that something actually doesn't sound good. So that's a good way in. But with this one, you could like pause the lesson, slow it down, and just think to yourself, 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a 5 E and a, which is a bit stressful to say and do at the same time. And then speed it up from there. 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a 5 E and a 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a 5 E and a 1 E and so on until you've got it going. And then what you can do is take it over to different instruments, because if you can do it on this, it doesn't have to be a thumb and a finger, or you know, you can do it with chords on guitar as well, and it can be thumb and bits of chords and stuff like that. You could have and so on. But obviously that could be different parts of a drum kit, or it could be, you could split bits of that up into being a bass line or a synth line or whatever. So the first thing to try is probably to have the hats on the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and the kick on the smaller fives, on the 1, 3, 1, 3, 1, 3, 1, 3. So let's hear that one. Cool. And then it's a case of, where do we put the snare? Do we put a, well, I mean, what's the most obvious choice is probably put it where it would normally go, within a beat. But the interesting thing about that is you're going to go snare, snare, and then what's going to happen is the snare's going to fall on the 1, so it's going to take 2 repetitions for it to actually resolve. So snare, 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 snare. But it sounds cool because, and it grooves really nicely because the snare is exactly where you expect it to be. There's just this unusual syncopation floating around underneath it. The other way that you could, in fact, let's actually just hear that one just now, a bit of context. So yeah, that's when it kind of just grooves in its most natural manner. Or you can treat the snare as if it's part of the smaller fragments here. You could treat it as if it's part of the fast fives. So what you could do is 1, 3, 5, 1, 3, 5. So kick, kick, snare, kick, kick, snare, kick, kick, snare, kick, kick, snare. And that's going to give you, it's going to feel like it's never really resolving, like you're in the middle of some kind of typhoon or hurricane or something like that. And it's a really good way to break up that groove thing, really surprise your listener for a second, and then back into what you're doing. So we'll try that just, well, let's demonstrate it on its own to begin with, and then what we'll do is we'll put it in the middle of the grooving one just as maybe a fill, yeah? So let's have it on its own first. Obviously, what I did there was just switched over and made my thumb the kick and the fingers the snare because it wasn't feeling typhoony enough. So let's try it grooving and then give you a wee nod and we'll burst into typhoon hurricane mode. Okay. Go. Yeah, that demonstrates that enough. Okay, so 2 really different feels from 5/8 polyrhythms. Obviously, you could do that as micrometers of 7, micrometers of 9, with a quarter note pulse over the top, and you get different syncopations again. And that's exactly what we're going to look at coming up. That's all for now. Thanks.